Hi everyone. In this podcast, I am talking about handling software requirements with Payson Hall. Let's go. Greetings everyone. Welcome to the awesome software testing and quality talks next episode. I have with me today Payson Hall, who is an expert in project management, has 40 years of experience under his belt, who values software requirements analysis and change control as myself. Welcome to the show, Payson. I'm quite excited to have you in software testing and quality talks. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Happy to chat with you, Venkat.
Awesome. So, Payson, we got introduced in social media and I happened to read a couple of your blogs. From those blogs, it looks like you feel that not controlling the requirements or changes to the software is an important issue that affects a software project. Would you like to elaborate?
I'd be happy to. A lot of the projects, the software development projects that I work on are done in the public sector on a fixed price, fixed schedule basis. And several of them are being done trying to use agile practices. And I think agile practices tactically work very well, but there's often concerns and considerations about scope. I think, the idea, the poster child for Agile, the ideal sweet spot for Agile is if you own the company and you want someone to maybe build a website for you and they're coming to you on a daily basis. So you're doing a phase limited commitment. They come to you daily or they come to you weekly saying, here's what we have so far. Do you wish to continue? How do you like this? And you can provide feedback. But as projects get larger, there's a huge danger that we don't agree what the end product looks like. And if we're working with a fixed price, fixed schedule contract, and we don't agree what the end price, the end product is going to look like, it can lead to a lot of conflict and confusion as, you, the customer, and me, the developer, try to navigate exactly what it is that you want. It can be a lot of rework there.
Defects in the requirements is an important consideration. I recently did a talk on software testing leadership in the requirements and functional specification stages. I shared that 65% of the software defects are from the requirements. As a software tester, I can see that this is almost true, as many times I have gone through back and forth on my testing and even the test strategy because of changes in requirements and the resulting defects. From your experience, does this number look correct?
It sounds intuitively correct to me. I haven't seen the data underlying it. I was at a conference a couple of years ago, and someone suggested that requirements change at a rate of about 2% per month. And I don't know the source of that, but that's another thing that makes some intuitive sense. Right? If you think about you're building a non-trivial system, you've got business partners or other systems that you exchange data with. So we can imagine those interfaces changing, some of the tools and the infrastructure changing. Again, I work a lot in the public sector, so we've got laws and regulations that change. If you're in a financial system, tax rates and how taxes are calculated can be changing and evolving. So if we imagine that poor requirements are a source of a bunch of grief, we can also worry that perfect requirements begin to age as soon as the ink is dry. And so ongoing care and feeding of requirements and making sure that requirements are clearly understood and testable is really important. That said, they're never going to be perfect. We have to agree to that. That's what people say, well, don't bother with requirements because they're going to change. Well, yeah, but we have to make sure we mostly agree what it is we're trying to accomplish. And correct. So, doing away with requirements doesn't solve that problem.
Absolutely. You mentioned in the latest blog about the effect of change in software on existing customers. You talked about your experience of using a note-taking application and how the changes they made to the application affected your ability to use that software. What tips can you provide to organizations to avoid doing these kind of knee-jerk changes and bring stability to software releases and software quality and ensuring customer delight.
That was a particularly fun rant. I think that there's an issue. There's some dynamic tension that we face as consumers of software. As consumers of software, we don't want software. We want what the software does for us. And so whether it's a word processor or a spreadsheet or presentation software or a note-taking software, we have something we're trying to accomplish. The note-taking software in particular that I wrote that blog about, I loved it when it was first introduced. It was simple. You hit a button, it opened. I had notebooks. They were synced across all of my devices. It was great. It was fast. It was easy to use. It was intuitive. It wasn't very fancy. They continually added features and functions that slowed it down and changed the user interface so that it was more cumbersome to use. And they went through a patch where it would crash pretty regularly, 2 or 3 times a day. And so, as I think I said in the article, people are paying me stupid amounts of money to try to help them with projects. I'm furiously taking notes in a conversation, and suddenly I've got to take time out to restart an application that's not professional. It's not respectful of my customer's time.
Correct.
Now, the thing that got me is I can imagine someone having a product that's functional and wonderful, and some folks in marketing saying, hey, we need to add some features. We need to keep up with, what another product is doing, or some customer calling us, hey, it'd be really neat if you did these extra things. But I think what commercial developers sometimes forget is the violence that's caused when they make significant changes to the user experience. If you run the help desk for a large organization, and the next version of the word processor moves a bunch of the commands to a different place in the command menu, and it's not upward compatible with old files, your phone is going to ring off the hook. Your customers are going to lose productivity as they adapt to the new thing. And I think that a lot of times the vendors, the software development vendors, don't appreciate the expense of significant changes to the UI. So yeah, that was a fun rant. I ended up replacing that tool. I found another tool that serves the same purpose. And as I said in the article, it's like I had recommended the prior tool to several people, but I have whined about the bad effects of that tool and named it by name for dozens and dozens and dozens because I was pretty angry. So I'm not sure it was a good marketing move on their part.
Yeah, that could be quite frustrating, and I can understand where you're coming from. And as I mentioned, probably the organization might think about doing canary releases to a few customers with prior permission to avoid this kind of frustration to the existing customers. I think that's a responsible thing to do. And even in today's environment of DevOps and continuous releases, it's quite possible to do that. And we have these blue-green deployments. There are several facilities available to make selective releases to a few customers. So I'm not sure why the note-taking application organization didn't do that. Let's talk about flushing out the requirements upfront as the first priority of the project. You mentioned about a struggle where the customer thinks that the vendor is playing by not detailing the requirements upfront, and the vendor thinks the customer is playing because the requirements goalposts are changing. So as a tester, I have fought several times with the development when they try to introduce new changes, even if the customer was not asking, just for the sake of making the product look attractive with shiny features. Even in these days of changing customer requirements based on feedback, nailing the requirements seem to save a lot of heartburn for the project. My question is, where do you draw the line? I know that you kind of answered it already a bit, but I would like you to still elaborate and explore as a team how to address this issue and what can be done with the different facets like performance, security, etc.
Well, there's a lot in there. Let's unpack it, and you ask me any questions that I skip. I think the first thing we need to say is gathering requirements is really a challenge. It's hard. It's a specialized skill. It takes practice to do it well. I'm a big fan of test-driven development. I think one of some of the feedback that I try to give people when I'm reviewing requirements is, how would we test this? That's kind of a standard question. How would I know if I had met this requirement? And that question finds flaws in an awful lot of requirements. So let's agree, gathering requirements is really challenging, particularly for a large system. And you can have a sexy database that's got 2,000 or 3,000 requirements in it, but it becomes really hard to track, becomes really hard to keep track of the interrelationships. It's hard to keep track of the assumptions underlying it. And I think because it's hard, because it takes specialized expertise, we often don't do it very well. Because we often don't do it very well, I think downstream, it's easy for people to say, well, they're wrong anyway. Why invest more time and energy up front? But I think that really what we have to do is acknowledge that it's hard and do the best job that we can, because sometimes we'll discover that there are requirements, for example, that are in conflict with one another. The report must be blue and the report must be red. And we need to identify those before anybody starts coding. We need to identify those conflicts. We also need to engage in ongoing care and feeding to try to keep the requirements as current as we can. That gives us a clear understanding of what done means. And then agile practices to try to, peel off those requirements and address them according to priority, according to architectural priority, according to customer priority. That all makes sense. But once we've got the requirements set in place and we're managing it, then everybody agrees what done means. So we can have more intelligent conversations about cost and schedule and priorities.
So I also read your comment that there needs to be an additional responsibility called change management in addition to project management. I think it was an infographic or a diagram that I saw in one of your Twitter posts. If we have a person who is just taking care of the change management in the requirements, would that address the problem?
I think it can, and that can be a part of the project management process. I don't know if the project manager is the best person to do it, depending on the scope of the project. But I think having someone whose mission in life, their primary goal in life, is to try to identify any refinements or changes in the requirements, and then making sure that everybody is on board, right? Treat the requirement set as a baseline document and make sure that changes are approved by folks that can afford to pay for it, right? I want to make sure changes are approved by the customer, that changes are approved by the head of the development, to make sure that we agree, yes, you can make that change and I can still hit your date, or you can make that change and we can get it done within this budget.
Talking about documenting the requirements, nobody seems to believe in documenting anymore. They took the Agile Manifesto too seriously here, and they're saying there's no need for documentation. Requirements documentation is bad. They're just laughing at it. But you can appreciate how important documenting the requirements is from the different facets of the product. There are several ways of doing it. We have BDD today to take care of coming up with examples and formulation of the requirements, as well as we have traceability matrix, which has been very successful thing in making sure that the tests that we write make sure that the requirements can be mapped to them. In your experience, and especially in the agile environment, what kind of practices do you think are effective in documenting the requirements and tracking them?
I think the most successful thing I've observed is a hybrid approach, where upfront they do the best job they can of defining requirements, put them in a database, manage them, and build traceability. And then Agile is a tactical approach to trying to implement the stories that represent those requirements. One of the things that you said is the Agile Manifesto often gets misquoted to say you don't need documentation. What they said was that documentation wasn't as important as a functional system. I agree, but documentation can be very important, particularly for larger projects, particularly if they're done by an external party. If you asked me to build you a house And I said, great, I'm going to build you a house and we're going to do this agilely. I'll build a room and then you tell me if you like it, and then I'll build another room. I don't know too much about the house that you want. I don't know if you're a bachelor and you're looking for a house to do a lot of entertaining, or if you're a family man with 6 children and you need a place for those children to play safely. And so I can do an awful lot of construction, and you give me feedback that says, no, you don't understand. Those marble steps are beautiful, but if my children fall down the marble steps, they're going to break arms and legs and heads. We really have to have a pretty good idea of what we're doing. And I understand the desire, no one gets into software development because they want to write documents. They want to write code. But to make sure that we're solving the right problem, I think we need to make sure that we understand the problem to be solved up front.
Yeah, that's quite relatable. So what are your views on, so we talked about traceability a bit. What are your views on analyzing the testability of requirements? There's so much talk about it today, and it could even rank #1 in Google, right? So not sure if it is overemphasized, but what do you think about testability and how to implement that?
To me, that's the litmus test. When I review a requirement set, the question I'm asking myself is, would I understand how to test this? Would I know what a successful outcome was like? So you'll see requirements like the system must be easy to use. I've seen that in a requirement set. System must be easy to use. That's meaningless.
Yeah.
Easy to use for who? Easy to use for someone who is not sighted. Easy to use for someone who's colorblind. Easy to use for someone who speaks the primary language, right? So if I'm building a system in Spanish, is it easy to use for someone who speaks English and doesn't speak Spanish, or who speaks Spanish as a second language? So when we talk about easy to use, it sounds wonderful. But when was the last time? Can you ever imagine a vendor looking at a requirement set saying, "Oh, the system has to be easy to use. We can't bid on this," right? But if we said, "I'm going to give you the system must be easy to use, and here's how we're going to test that. We're going to sit 10 people down who speak the primary language of the system as either a first or second language. You're going to give them 10 minutes of instruction, and they need to be able to do these 5 things using the system without further assistance." Now we're talking about a definition of easy to use. And we could run a test, we could run an experiment. And I think that if we were that explicit, people would not be nearly so eager to sign up to say, "Oh yeah, our system's easy to use." Right? And is 100% a reasonable standard? Or should you say 9 out of 10 people with a high school education who speak, who have taken 10 minutes of instruction should be able to accomplish these functions?
I think we even talked about it last time, that the goals need to be SMART, SMART. And I think requirements is no different in that they need to be specific and measurable and all that. That's pretty important, to be specific, and that will avoid a lot of heartburn in the project execution. Great. So what specific advices would you like to give software testers on requirements and change control based on your experience?
First, try to review the requirements as soon in the process as you can. If you can review the requirements ahead of time, you might be able to help the developers. If you can think about, here's how I'd like to test this. Some examples, some strange examples. I've worked on healthcare systems where the client could not share test data because of privacy concerns. And so people said, okay, well, here's a list of all these requirements. We have to do this, that, and the other thing, and here are the relationships amongst the records. But there's no test data available. And so just asking, where's the test data for this supposed to come from? Who's going to synthesize it? How are they going to synthesize it? Could be really helpful. Like I said, getting involved early so that you can guide the developers. One of the nice things about test-driven development is that it encourages you to build, I'll use the word scaffolding, or the stubs and the drivers, to make sure that even for an incomplete system, we can create the appropriate feedback or the appropriate behavior of the parts of the system that haven't been built yet. And so if we're thinking about testing early on, we can describe, in order to test this piece, I'll need these other functions. And that might change the order that the developers build those functions. Or it might be that it helps the developers know that there's some scaffolding or some some stubs and drivers that need to be put into the backlog in order to facilitate testing.
Anything else you would like to cover today as part of this discussion on requirements?
I guess I'd just really reiterate that requirements help to define the boundaries of a system. And, if we're going to say that a project, any project, is going to be defined by the schedule, how much time do we have to do this, the resources that are required to do it, and the scope, right, which is basically the qualities and the boundary has to be clear. If we don't agree what the boundary is, then any conversation of schedule and cost is wishful thinking.
Absolutely.
I can't tell you how much your house is going to cost to build your house until we've agreed pretty much to a blueprint and the materials and the time frame. Are we building it during a monsoon, or are we building it during a dry period? All those things are going to affect the project as a whole. And so I think requirements are really important to help us understand the scope of an effort. It's not that they absolutely may be negotiated after as we get smarter, and they may evolve, as we were saying earlier. They may change as we just because time is passing. I start to build your house and the cost of lumber goes up. You and I may need to have a conversation about either more money for lumber or reducing the amount of floor space if we want to stay within your budget. But we have to have a pretty good idea of how much lumber we're using. And, that's basically requirements and design.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise, Payson. It has been a pleasure interacting with you. I look forward for future discussions in Software Testing and Quality Talks channel. Have a nice day and all the best for your endeavors.
Venkat, I appreciate the chance to play. Good day.
Bye-bye.
What are your thoughts on handling the requirements? What are your experiences in handling requirements? Is there anything that you would like to suggest as improvement? What would you like to share with the software industry on requirements handling based on your experience? Comment on this video and let us know. Payson or me will reply to you. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.